What is going on, guys? Joey here with Big Will, Coach Will, William Squats. Uh, Bringing you guys a Q&A. Just gonna go over some questions, and hopefully, my goal for this video is for you guys to get to know Will a little bit better and to hopefully learn something. Question number one: how do you know how much to do on secondary days? I will say the reason why I'm bringing up this question is because Will recently did a collaboration post with me on secondary deadlifts, and one of the commenters said something about what they were doing on their second day, and I asked him, "How did you get to that? Like, how are you doing that much work on your second deadlift?" Because in my mind, surely he probably didn't work his way up to that point or troubleshoot to find that he needed to land there. He just maybe saw something on the internet and was like, "Okay, that's what I need to do." So I wanted to ask you, Will, how do people know how much they should be doing on their secondary days? And, for a bench, this could be the third bench day, the fourth bench day. How would you go about setting that up?
So I always think it's best to go a bit on the conservative side when adding an additional day for frequency. Um, for the example that you're talking about, the guy had said that he was doing 10 sets of deadlift or something like that. And we asked him how many days he was doing. He said he had 2 days. So from that, a lot of the time, I would say the average amount of sets for a primary day, like saying you're deadlifting once a week, is probably 3 to 4 sets. Maybe one top set, one top volume set, and then the remaining being a lower intensity set. So from there, it's 4 sets, right? Him doing 10 sets would mean that he probably added just 5 more sets, maybe another set on the primary, 5 sets on the secondary. And it's like, if you're new, you can probably tolerate that and have no issue, especially if you're smart with the loads. But as you get stronger, that's going to really beat you up and can really interfere, let's say, just your deadlift training in general and your squat. So for me, for example, if I think someone needs additional deadlift training, I'll first see what I could do with the primary day, add some accessories, and you know, try that out, see how they respond. From there, if we aren't getting the response that we want, or if let's say they're feeling rusty, they need more familiarity with the lift, we can add in 1 set or maybe even 2 sets on that secondary day. And that really just comes down to how a lifter is built. Um, you know, if someone has super short arms, they're probably not going to be able to tolerate much volume on a secondary day. So to always take that into account, and the absolute load that they're doing and their strength level is also going to be, a very important variable to take into consideration. But like I said, starting low, for example, 3 sets on a primary and then 1 set maybe on a secondary with some accessory work is a good place to start. And then from there, keep track of the trend that you're going with. And if you're not seeing the progress that you want, then you can start adding another set on the primary or the secondary, depending on how you're feeling on those days.
I think that's a great answer to transition into one of our later questions, but since we're already here, what are some examples of jumps? You can use percent or relative, you can use RPE, whatever, um, that you would like to make from week to week on, let's say like a primary day or a primary set. Sorry, my mic is probably far away. Like a set where, a main driver set. So like for example, I really like the single with the first back down afterwards, and that's going to be like a big chunk of what you're pushing and what you're progressing. Um, so from week to week, like week 1 to 4 or week 2 to 4, something like that. What are some examples of progression that you would make from week to week?
So I would say, depending on the strength level, it's going to be higher or lower, obviously, but maybe a good ballpark would be 2.5 to 5% if I had to give a percentage to it. For example, if someone has like a 250 squat and they're starting at a RP6 single, you'd probably be good with doing 10 kilo jumps, 12.5 kilo jumps, and just making sure that you map out your week 1 in a way to know that you're not going to burn out, say week 2, week 3, and then having to, you know, backtrack a little bit by the time week 4 comes around. Um, when it comes to the higher rep sets, I think it's a lot harder to really progress that as much as a single, just because you're doing more reps in general. And so that being said, you're going to be taking smaller jumps, and being able to increase the loads that you're using gradually over time in a block is going to be super important with building momentum, which is what we want to do in the grand scheme of things. So doing a smaller jump week to week on your volume sets versus your heavier top set is likely going to yield the best results in terms of recoverability and being able to maintain that momentum.
I've done I've done things in the past with some of my like very intuitive lifters that have gotten like super experienced. Um and I'll tell them like, yo, if and I don't necessarily think that everybody should do this. And I think um my my addition to Will's answer is simply to let others know that a lot of different ways can work. Some ways are at the end of the day when Will says momentum, that's like I think you're referring to week, right? You want to keep momentum
Yeah.
going from week to week. Um, if I have 3 8 week periods with someone before we need to compete, I may stretch that out and say I want to maintain momentum across 8 week to 8 week, right? So what do I mean by that? Let's say we have Russ coming in, and Russ comes in and he takes like, we do a deload week 1, and then week 2 he feels really really good and he takes like, you know 335 at like a 9, right? That's like a little ahead of schedule, and that's like kind of where maybe we want to end up in the meet. And we're probably not going to be able to build on that the week after. There have been times when we have, because he's been bulking, which is cool, and I think the mental euphoria that comes from hitting a big number like that can be very powerful. And typically, if let me ask you this, if you have a lifter that has been really really disciplined and they've kind of just been building and from week to week and following the program to the T, and you're coming off a deload and they come in and they say like, dude, I feel fucking amazing today. I could hit. I know I can hit. I can easily hit a PR. How likely are you to say, you know what, like let's do it. Let's get that. Let's get
I
that payoff. Or let
I
or
think the mental reward and just confidence building in that is huge. So I would more than likely do that as long as, we're not close to a meet or anything
yeah,
like that where we need to structure it in a way. But yeah, no, I think, everyone likes hitting PRs, and the more you hit those PRs, the more you're going to trust your coach, the more you're going to trust the program. And so
yeah,
it's just a win-win.
yeah. I think obviously I in some regard it has to kind of be earned. Um, there are times when like today for example with Cranon, she just came back from Gymshark, and I was expecting there to be some travel fatigue, and I had only planned for like it was like high 400s, but she was really strong. And I was very confident that we could take like something a little bit less than an opener, and she would like smoke it, and she did, and it was like a good morale boost. And like now her mood the rest of the day and in that training session is like happy. She also had a good squat day this week, so overall she was just up. So sometimes you plan that progression out, like you're pacing yourself and you're planning for things to kind of land in a certain place. But I think, and this is like really like super, I think it's pretty advanced. I definitely don't want like new people like doing that. Um,
They need to really understand
what
they're
is,
doing,
yeah,
like how it works, and that you can't do it all the time. I feel like ego can play a role in that, and they'd want to be like every deload week they can, when they feel good, they would
yeah,
want to go heavy. But
yeah. It's especially too like if they're in a surplus or if they're dieting. I have a lifter right now that's dieting, and I told her um this is like something that we haven't done before, and we don't know. Like it could affect your peak different because you're not just eating into it. You're dieting a little bit, so it's not nothing crazy. But anyway, I thought that was a good little transition. And then, speaking of dieting, how long would you like to be in a deficit, or do you like to have yourself or lifters in a deficit before you add food back in, or or how long can you stay in that deficit before training starts to take a hit? And in your, how long would you like the deficit to last before you're like, okay, we've been doing this long enough, it's time, we're starting to see some negative effects in training, let's reverse.
So I would say usually for me, whenever I'm dieting, I start to feel the dip in performance whenever I lose probably around 15 pounds. So relative, it's like 7% of my body weight or so whenever I do start that. So I'd say around that range. Um, really just when your leverages start changing a lot and you see performance consistently dropping, that is a good sign that you know you should probably take a little bit of a break. It doesn't even have to get back into a surplus or anything, just maintain for a while and have your body hit some equilibrium. But um yeah, so I would say probably 7 to 10% usually is the amount that is a good way to kind of shift goals for a sec or back to maintaining.
How long would you bring that food back up to equilibrium before you would think about, okay, I think we've held this long enough, it's time to make that next push down another 2.5 to 5%?
I think when it really just comes down to performance. Like if they get a big spike back and they're getting back to similar numbers that they were at before, I think that should be a pretty good determining factor. And just I can't like as long as they're adhering to their diet and everything, I think the turnaround could be a lot quicker than others. So yeah, it was just really performance based in my opinion.
Sounds good. Is working with Ina on deadlift much different versus everybody else?
I would say his deadlift training is pretty different. I think there's one person who I have similar training with the way I structure it, but over the years, like I think we started with deadlifting once a week. I think that got us to like 330ish, but then he kind of stalled out. We went to twice a week, and that got him up to the 800 range, and then he was getting really beat up, so he went um, back to one time a week. So it's been back and forth. But I think now we've been able to manipulate his training to consistently pull twice a week. We're just keeping that secondary day very conservative. Like he pulls 850, and that secondary day he's usually working around like high 500s, low 600s for his volume work. But um, I think as he's gotten stronger, each set has cost more. And so because of that, we've had to actually rely more on relative intensity than actually total volume accumulation and just getting that extra practice with heavier loads. Because whenever we got over like 365 kilos, um, 365 kilos, he would kind of have that helicopter motion. And so we really needed to find a way to get more exposure to that. Uh, load range, and I think with the extra relative intensity of bringing down volume, we're able to touch weights around that range without overdoing him on the volume side of it because he was getting really beat up and it was affecting his squat. And so currently it's probably the lowest deadlift volume he's ever done, and his squat's been coming up pretty consistently. So we'll see how the trend continues on.
What is chipping?
Oh, well, chipping. I always tell my lifters to if there's an RP7 and the next week is RP78, you don't actually have to absolutely max out that RP for the day. And so chipping would just be essentially increasing the load like 2.5 kilos. Usually you do that on a secondary day. So it's just pretty much a safeguard to make sure you're building momentum. Um, So really just gradually increasing your loads over time in a way that you don't really run into any fatigue issues.
Okay, this next question, it's more of an observation. This last question, I guess. Any advice to get to the top? The example that I brought up before this was if we just take a look at the 83s, right? Um, we have Tim, we have Jurens, we have, I believe it's Aid. I don't want to say it wrong. Russ, Joe, and then there's like some sub juniors coming up, right? Of those guys, um, Jurens, Russ, Aid, Tim, they've actually been around for a really long time. Um, there's a picture with Callie and Aid from like 2000 and 2021, I believe, 3 years ago. Russ obviously has been doing this with me since 2017. Jurens was there in 2018. Um, but all these guys have been like steadily working over the years to kind of get to this point. And I would say that it is rare. I think Joe is probably the exception. He is the exception because he's exceptional. Um, to, to to have somebody like come in and I would, just like come in and like be in the mix. Granted his training age is not young. His he's actually been competing for like a long time. So in your opinion, Will, make after making that statement or that observation, what advice do you have to lifters that aspire to, you know, Ina as well? Ina has been around. Do you remember Ina's first Worlds with you? What he totaled? It wasn't even in the 800s, right?
No, it was, I want to say it was like 260 squat, 335 deadlift, bench. I think it was like 137, 140. I
Yeah.
can't recall.
So, what advice do you have to the youngins that are looking at this that want to get to that point? Um, and right now they're just kind of starting out, and it seems like so unbelievably far away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the sooner you get the fundamentals down, the better progress you'll make over time. And don't be afraid of gaining muscle. You can always cut down to a weight class that you want to later. So, like with,
Tim, Tim was 83 in 2018, and then or 2019, and then like all these years he like trained in the background and then cut down to 74, tried that, and then went up. So that's just
yeah,
backing up what you're
yeah,
saying.
because you won't ever really see anyone at the top that isn't super jacked, and I think that's super important. Um, going through like you have all these like 18-year-olds coming in and wanting to be like having a 500 dots, 550 dots, and it's just like that takes years to get into unless you're
Elliot Sykes.
substantially genetically gifted.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, taking your ego out of your training, I think it's important to have some delusion, but for the grand scheme of things, in terms of finding and hitting the appropriate loads that you're supposed to be hitting, learning how to pace things appropriately, if you can do that all early on, don't be afraid of gaining muscle. Take care of your sleep. Take care of your diet choices. I know people are young, but partying X amount of times during the year, trying to limit that. I think you can get a way further than you think you can the sooner you do that. And being 18, early 20s, that's probably the best time to train, best time to build muscle.
Yeah.
So, the sooner you get that done, the longer your career is going to be and the more relevant you'll be in the future, likely. So, I mean, I started lifting when I was 17 and I made, well, it was the USAPL Nationals. my first USAPL nationals was when I was like 22, I think, 23, and I wasn't able to qualify all those years beforehand. So it just takes time. You gotta, you know,
It was
people think 5 years.
it was kind of hard back then. It was not like the totals were actually like pretty solid. For US was obviously like untested, so it was like
Yeah,
tough. It was like if you could
yeah.
qualify, it was like a huge goal. And like that, they also had the. Do you remember the international elite?
Oh my God, yeah,
And there was like advanced and like master one or
yeah.
something. Like I like that. That was sick. It gave people like
Yeah.
goals, like levels to like level up. But I didn't mean to cut you off.
But yeah, I mean, a year of really solid training, healthy training, consistent training. Like there's been people that I've worked with that have put on 100, 200 pounds onto their total because they're just super consistent. They're not interested in anything else other than powerlifting. Not saying that you have to live that way, but the option's there.
I have an example. Ju- at last year Junior Worlds, Alba did 500. This year Junior World, she did 554, and she's a small girl. So, but
There you go.
she's exactly that type of lifter that you just said. She just trains and is locked in and focuses on nutrition and doesn't go out, and she goes to bed at like 9. Like, she's super locked in. So, Joe Bornstein, when you talk to him, I met him at oh my God, the prime time at Age Division Nationals, and then again in Raleigh. He's locked in. He doesn't want to do anything crazy. He just wants to train, do school, like watch anime, rest. Like that's it. He knows, and like hang out with his girlfriend and stuff like that. Like he knows, if I go do all those things that like most 21-year-olds are doing right now, it's not going to get me to like where I want to go. I think it really does translate, and I think those guys that got started early were able to do something like really special later on. And I also think, and I don't have anything to back this up other than observations, that if you start young enough, you can make adaptations that you perhaps couldn't have made when you were older just because you're still growing. So you're kind of like biasing your body to adapt in a certain way and it has like more tools to do so because you're young. Um, like maybe you were supposed to be like 6'3", but you started powerlifting when you were like 5 years old, or something like that. Like you started like playing around with barbells and lifting heavier stuff, and then you only grew to like 5'9", but you're like insanely good. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting to me. I think that was a informative 20 minutes. Um, Will is, one of the he was the first flex coach after obviously myself, and he's a great value and asset to the team, and it's been super dope to be on this journey with him all these years, and I usually have him at Sheffield every time to help me out with Keiko, but no Keiko this year, but we're gonna work on that, and
I'm wearing my
we'll have.
Keiko shirt.
Yep, there you go. Got that. Shout out to Keiko. But yeah, you guys can find Will at William Squats on Instagram or flextrainingsystems.com, and feel free to reach out to either of us. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Peace.